The French doors between the two rooms were removed to create a two-layered room. About 20 people were waiting for the food to be brought to them. In the pond, carp were watching them. Today is my nephew's birthday party. All the relatives gathered to celebrate his birthday. To my surprise, today's menu was curry. This was my nephew Dylan's request. For some reason, my mother-in-law made me and my sister-in-law, Ruby, carry the other dishes. She said she would bring the curry later. After a while, my mother-in-law put the curry in front of me. She knew that I didn't like curry, so she intentionally served it in a large portion. Besides, it looked darker than other people's curry. My mother-in-law grinned with a nasty look on her face. Just then, a doorbell rang and fortunately, a delivery service came. My mother-in-law and I had ordered some gourmet food. She went to the front door with delight. Now, I went to the kitchen with a curry dish and put half the curry back in the pot. Then I hurry back to the table. After a while, my mother-in-law came back and looked at my plate and asked me how I was doing. Something is wrong. My nephew was absorbed in the curry and rice. Another plate. I'll go. My mother-in-law said nothing. The nephew ate his second bowl of curry and rice with relish. At that moment, Dylan, who had been shoveling down the curry, suddenly suffered and spit out the curry. What's wrong? Dylan! My mother-in-law, who was watching the scene, turned pale. Why did Dylan eat it? I shivered as I heard her exclaiming, "Why did you eat it?" I was shaking in my boots as I realized that there might have been something in that black curry. I was filled with rage. I swore to myself that I would find the proof and take revenge on my mother-in-law someday. I am Amy, a 29-year-old junior high school teacher in my hometown. I will soon be a woman in her 20s. When I was 24 years old, I attended a high school reunion and met my husband Ken, who had come to pick up his sister, a classmate. My husband was 31 years old at the time. Ken, who was 6 years older than me, seemed very calm. I was attracted to him because I felt that his gentle, fast-paced personality was somewhat similar to my own. My husband also seemed to think I was charming and cute, and we hit it off right away. My husband works at a business hotel in a neighboring town, and his job requires him to work many night shifts, which makes his life irregular. Ken, a laid-back and carefree person, was not interested in living alone and lived with his parents. Since I was also living with my parents, I had nothing to do with housework, and I was always busy with work every day. We were both looking forward to settling down soon, so about 6 months into our relationship, we decided to get married. When I went to my husband's house to greet him at his wedding, my mother-in-law treated me to a home-cooked meal. Both my mother-in-law and father-in-law seemed to like me. We greeted each other's parents and got married without any problems. One day, I visited my parents' home for the first time in a long time. My mother-in-law said to me, "Hey, Amy, are you thinking of having children?" I was surprised and stunned at the sudden remark. My mother-in-law raised an eyebrow when she heard my honest answer, "Children?" My mother-in-law raised her eyebrows when she heard my honest answer, "We just got married, and I haven't thought that far ahead." "Oh, really? I hope to have a child someday." I felt sorry for my mother-in-law who looked a little depressed. Then, my mother-in-law said something surprising again. "Hey, Amy, if you want, would you like to live with us?" "Oh, you want to live with us? Even if you don't think about having children now, you might have children eventually, right? If we live together at that time, Amy won't have to quit his job and I will take care of the housework, and I will be able to see my grandchildren every day and be happy when the house is brightened up. We're all in a good place, aren't we?" Ken's house is an old-fashioned mansion. It has a small pond in the garden. It had been remodeled in a modern style, so even if we moved in together, we would have enough space to maintain our privacy. I was a little worried, but I agreed to move in with them, thinking that I would be able to keep my privacy and have a child to play in the yard in the future. So, the conversation proceeded smoothly, and we started living together at my parents-in-law's house. Life with my in-laws was more comfortable than I had expected, and we had a happy honeymoon. However, we had a big problem. 3 years had passed since our marriage, and we still could not have children. I'm home. When I came home, my husband, who had been home all day on his day off, appeared stealthily from the back of the house. "Amy, why don't you go to a fertility clinic and see what they can do for you?" My mother referred me. "Yes, that's good. I was also concerned about that. I was also concerned about my inability to have children, so I thought it would be a good opportunity. On Ken's Saturday off, we took a cab in the morning to a hospital famous for its fertility treatments. What would you do if you were told that your body was incapable of having children? I asked my husband, anxious and fearful. He said, "Well, I don't know." Well, at that time, no matter which of us is the cause of the problem, we will both give up. Of course, I would love to have a baby, but I'm not obsessed with that. As long as I can be with you, that's all that matters to me. He held my hand and smiled at me. I know, thank you. I feel the same way. Hearing his words, I felt a little relieved to know that neither of us was fixated on the child. After the examination, he said, "Well, you are both still young, so there is a good chance that you will have children. However, if women are not careful, they will soon start having babies at an older age, and it will gradually become more difficult for them to have children. The earlier you start fertility treatment, the more likely it is that you will be able to conceive, but we will leave this up to you two to decide. We weren't in a hurry to have children, but I will be having a baby at advanced age soon." It was an indescribable, complicated feeling. The ride home was quiet. There is a good chance of conceiving a child, but fertility treatment is the best way to make the most of that possibility. I do not want to have a child at all costs. Besides, I am busy with work every day, and if it takes time to go to the hospital, I am not sure if I will be able to take that much time. Besides, I am still young. Should I really start treatment now? Shouldn't I wait for the right time? I was in a quandary. After coming home from the hospital, Ken reported the result to his mother-in-law. She said, "I see. Of course, you are going to get treatment, aren't you, Amy?" She immediately answered, "Of course, you are going to get treatment, and you don't have to worry about money." I was a little confused by this comment. Well, I'm having a hard time balancing my work and my life, so I'm going to let nature take its course a little more. What are you talking about? If you don't start soon, you'll have to start having babies at an older age, and you won't be able to have more children. Why don't you take this opportunity to quit your job? Quitting my job. To be honest, I had never thought of that. Of course, there are days when I get frustrated because the students don't listen to me at all, and there are times when I feel like giving up because of the workload. But I still love my job. I could see the faces of the students I work with in my mind. I can't stop working. I love my job. I looked straight at my mother-in-law and said, "I can't believe you. Why? We need to have children." Her eyes widened in surprise. Of course, I would like to have a child, but Ken and I don't put that much emphasis on having a child at this moment. Yes, I understand. Although she answered me so, she was clearly unhappy about it. Perhaps it was from that day on, my mother-in-law and I began to behave strangely toward each other. She continued to persuade me to undergo fertility treatment every day for some time after that. One day, she said, "How about this hospital?" One day, she brought me a pamphlet of a hospital, saying, "How about this hospital? A woman doctor will take care of you, so I think she will be kind to you." The more she persistently tried to persuade me, the more I felt like she was forcing me to do something I didn't want to do. The more I was persistently persuaded, the more I disliked the feeling of being coerced. Please stop this. I will talk about the child with Ken. Please leave me alone now, I said in a stronger tone than usual. However, my mother-in-law, who heard this comment, thought that I had no intention to do so, and her attitude gradually turned cold. She hardly tried to talk to me. She did not make eye contact with me when I tried to talk to her, and one time, I heard her talking about me bluntly on the phone while she was talking with her friend. The content of the phone call was, "Is it hard for your wife too? But you know, compared to my wife, she's still pretty. My wife doesn't do anything at all. All she does is make cup noodles. She only has a big appetite and she is a flying pole smasher." What a terrible thing to be told. I heard it from the shadow of the wardrobe. My mother-in-law had been kind and gentle when we first got married. But now she is talking ill of me with her friends. I was so sad that I burst into tears at the thought that my mother-in-law would treat me like this for the rest of my life, until we had children. After about a week, I had said the same thing to my mother-in-law before, but that time she said, "You are busy with your work, aren't you? Don't worry about it." She smiled at me and said, "Don't worry, you are busy with your work, aren't you?" But this time was different. Then, I will ask you to start tomorrow. What do you mean you finally want to do it? I thought to myself, but I held back my anger. Then I smiled and said, I'll take care of it. But I come home late every day, so I'll leave dinner to you, Mother. Yes, I'll make dinner. The next morning, I woke up an hour early and went to the kitchen to make breakfast with my mother-in-law, but she did not come out of her room. I thought it was strange, but if I kept waiting for her, I would not be able to make it to work in time. Then my father-in-law came over. Amy, what's wrong? Good morning. I've decided to start cooking today. My father-in-law seemed a little surprised. Thank you. He seemed a little surprised, but I see. He said kind words to me, good luck, and don't push yourself too hard. Then my mother-in-law and I finally came into the living room. My father-in-law's kind words touched my heart. He said, Amy, did you have a good time cooking by yourself? I'm not a very good cook, but I did my best today. My husband was on duty today and had not come home yet. I started to eat with my mother-in-law and father-in-law. When my mother-in-law drank some of the miso soup I had made, she said, What is this miso soup? She frowned and said, What is this soup? She frowned. What's wrong with it? Did you use powder stock? Yes, I used granulated soup stock. What have you been looking at all this time? Suddenly my mother-in-law became irritated. I was frightened because I didn't know what to do. My father-in-law followed up by saying, Mom, this is very good. However, you, shut up, mother-in-law yelled. The air became quiet with her angry voice. All three of us ate our meals in silence, without opening our mouths. From that day on, this kind of exchange was repeated every morning. I sighed, thinking that this would happen again today. However, my mother-in-law's attacks on me did not end there. One day, when I came home from working overtime, I found that the food that was always placed on the table was not there. As I was standing there, she called out to me from behind. I was startled by the suddenness of the situation. Amy. It was my mother-in-law behind me. I was so surprised to see you, Mother. I was so surprised. I smiled at her, and she said with a straight face, From now on, you cook dinner. What do you mean? I was stunned, not understanding what he meant. You are Ken's wife, aren't you? It was wrong for me to cook until now. That's true too. My mother-in-law did nothing wrong. It's just that before we moved in together, my mother-in-law told me that she would do it. And it's a little too abrupt. It's sudden. But I also finish my work late, and there are days when I have to prepare ready-made meals or packed lunches after work. Ken will be home late at night anyway, right? Yes. Then, even after work, you still have time before Ken comes home. Don't take it easy on me, she spat. My mother-in-law had a point. Usually, every family cooks dinner after work. I couldn't say anything to her. Oh, I shouldn't have said something unnecessary that day and set my mother-in-law on fire. It can't be helped. From now on, when Ken is not around, I will eat out and go home. I decided to think positively like that. After that, I was completely open-minded and kept positive thinking, so I did not have to worry about my mother-in-law as before. She did not like the fact that my expression had become brighter, and she did not make eye contact with me, but rather she ignored me more and more. I did not notice my mother-in-law, who not only ignored me but also glared at me coldly when I came to work with a smile on her face. I had not noticed that the corner of her mouth on the right side was slightly upturned. Today is May 5th, and it is the 9th birthday of my nephew Dylan, my sister-in-law's son. My mother-in-law, father-in-law, Ruby and her son gathered at our house. Ruby is raising Dylan as a single mother after the death of her husband. She was a classmate of mine when she met my husband. And Ken's cousin June. 3 families, 4 people, and my parents also came. My husband had taken a month off for this event. Today was Dylan's favorite, and my least favorite, curry rice. My sister-in-law Ruby and I were in charge of preparing the curry. My mother-in-law was in an unusually good mood today. You too, I'll take care of the rest, so please relax. Unusually, my mother-in-law said she would do the cooking by herself. I wondered why this was unusual, since she had been forcing me to do everything lately, but I didn't mind. After playing video games with Dylan for a while, I heard my mother-in-law's voice from the kitchen saying, "It's ready." Ruby and I headed for the kitchen. "Ruby, please bring a plate of hors d'oeuvres." Ruby took a plate of hors d'oeuvres. When I was about to put rice on the curry dish, my mother-in-law said, "I'll take care of that, you take care of the drinks." They were all looking at the food and saying, "Wow." Then my mother-in-law brought the curry to the dining table. My mother-in-law also came to my table and put a plate of curry in front of me, saying, "This is for you." At that time, I did not notice that my mother-in-law had a wry smile on her face. A large bowl of black curry was placed in front of me. The curry was a color I had never seen before, and I felt a little queasy. Just then, the doorbell rang. "Oh, you're early." It seemed that the delivery man had brought some gourmet food ordered by mail order. My mother-in-law scurried happily to the front door. Now, I returned to the kitchen with the curry dish and put half of it back in the pot. I took the lighter curry dish back to the table. My eyes met my father-in-law's for a moment. Thinking it was a bad idea, I hurriedly said, "I have reduced the quantity a little to lose weight," to which he laughed and said, "I am not that fat." After a while, my mother-in-law came back and stared at my plate. I was afraid that she might notice me, but apparently she did not. My nephew is a big guy. And he loves wrestling. In no time at all, he had finished his first bowl. "Another round. Oh my. You eat a lot. Curry is my favorite food." Dylan opened his big mouth and took his second drink, which he suddenly spit out. He began to suffer in agony. My sister-in-law rushed down to my nephew and said, "What's wrong?" She called out to him. My husband, who was watching the situation, immediately called an ambulance. "Dylan. Dylan." Ruby kept calling out to her mother-in-law, who was stunned with her mouth wide open. Why did Dylan eat it? She looked frustrated and shouted again and again, "Why did you eat it?" From her comment, I realized that she had put something in my curry. My legs were shaking so badly. I guessed that Dylan must have eaten the curry that I put back in the pot. This made sense of my mother-in-law's unusual expression today. Ruby and Diane also rode in with the paramedics. Since we did not have our own car, we decided to take a cab with me to the emergency room later. My husband sat in the passenger seat and my father-in-law and I in the back seat, but my mother-in-law did not come easily. Mom is late. What is she doing at a time like this? I thought to myself. Ken, I'm going to pick up your mother. I headed for the kitchen, my footsteps trailing behind me. As I approached the kitchen, I heard a noise. I crouched down at the corner of the entrance to the kitchen from the hallway, peered silently inside, and winced. There, I saw my mother-in-law washing a curry pot with a terrible look on her face. Her legs were hunched over and steam seemed to be coming out of her head. It was not the usual mother-in-law. She looked like a devil in disguise. There was no more curry inside. They must have thrown it away in the toilet or in the drainage ditch. I was too frightened to speak to my mother-in-law, who was desperately trying to hide the evidence, even though my nephew had been brought to the hospital in such a state. I couldn't move my legs to go back to the house. Meow. I heard the neighbor's cat's voice from outside behind me. My mother-in-law glanced at me and our eyes met. My mother-in-law pretended to be calm when she noticed my presence. "Hey, Amy, I thought I'd clean up a little before we go." "I see." My hands were shaking uncontrollably. I tried to keep my composure so that she would not notice, and somehow I got up and said, "Shall we go, Mother?" I looked at my mother-in-law's hand was shaking. "You're late." I had to clean up a little, otherwise the smell would get on the wall. I was afraid of what was to come, thinking that the smell would not seep into the walls just because I left the curry pot unattended. "We're here." We arrived at the hospital in about 15 minutes. It was a large general hospital. It was now 7 p.m. We entered through the emergency entrance. I followed the directions given by the security guard to the ICU. A nurse, a little younger than me, approached me. "Are you a member of Dylan's family?" "Yes, I am." "Please wait here for a moment." We were led to a bench a short distance away. There were 3 black plastic sofas arranged in a U-shape that could accommodate about 4 people. "Where is Ruby?" "She must be with Dylan." When I looked at my mother-in-law, her eyes were darting about. There was something obviously wrong with her. After about 10 minutes, Ruby came in with a sad face. "How is Dylan doing?" "He just finished his examination and is having his stomach washed." I knew it was curry. I wondered if it was my imagination, but I thought I saw my father-in-law looking at me with a sideways glance for a moment. If there had been something in the curry, he would have suspected me. But I had no motive. No, there is a motive if you force yourself to look for it. A wife who can't have children might be jealous of her sister-in-law's children and try to kill him. If so, there is a stronger motive for my mother-in-law to kill me. What should I do? That's not what you should worry about now. You have to be strong, I said to herself. Then Ruby muttered, it's just like with her. I looked at Ruby in surprise. What do you mean by that, man? My dead husband. I had heard from my mother-in-law that he died of cancer. Did he die in this hospital? The hospital was not here, but St. Mary's Hospital. The similarity is in the symptoms. It wasn't cancer? I had never heard any more details about Mr. G's death, because all the family members did not want to talk about him. No, it wasn't. What? There was sulfuric acid in the stew. What do you mean? That day was Dylan's kindergarten field day. We had dinner at my parents' house in the evening. It was his favorite stew next to curry. But only his stew had it. I was so excited to see him. So everyone didn't mention it. Was it in today's curry? I wonder if it will continue. I looked at my mother-in-law. She was staring at the wall. She looked as if she was holding something back. She was probably trying not to get upset. Did his work go well? About half a year before the incident happened, the company went bankrupt. Since then, he had been sleeping at home every day. I didn't realize that. After that, he was just collecting unemployment insurance. He never told me what he was going to do. Ruby started working around that time, too. There were times when Ruby and Mom argued. This comment from my father-in-law convinced me that Ruby's husband had been murdered by my mother-in-law. After a while, the nurse came to me. Please come this way, everyone. We proceeded to the examination room. The elderly doctor turned to us and said, rest assured, he has been saved. Everyone shouted and cried with joy. I looked at my mother-in-law, who was also crying. It must have been because she did not have to kill Dylan. Sulfuric acid was detected in his stomach. Everyone looked at me as if they knew it. My mother-in-law looked down. I asked my mother-in-law, Mother, do you know anything about this? My words made everyone gasp. Amy, that can't be true. My husband stopped me, so I could not pursue the matter any further. My mother-in-law was staring at me with dead eyes. After that, all my relatives were summoned by the police for questioning. I could not forgive myself for the fact that I had almost been killed. I desperately thought about what I should do to avenge my mother-in-law. I came up with the idea of spreading rumors throughout the town. I decided to spread the rumor by talking to my students. The next day, I told the students at the junior high school where I worked about the incident. Hey, what do you guys think? My mother-in-law is definitely suspicious. The students were amused by the story and seemed to be telling their families about it at home. Perhaps because of that, our neighbors also started to gossip that my mother-in-law was the culprit. Shame, shame. I was seen every time I went out with my mother-in-law. One day, when my mother-in-law went to her favorite flower shop, the moment she made eye contact with the owner, he closed the shutters and she was not allowed to go inside. Perhaps it was my mother-in-law's imagination, but even the stray cats in the neighborhood seemed to run away when she approached them. As she spent such days, my mother-in-law seemed to start worrying even about the sparrows running away as usual. She seemed to be mentally trapped. It was obvious that my mother-in-law was gradually losing weight due to the stress. After about a month, Dylan was safely discharged from the hospital. Now he is showing his naughty side again. On the other hand, my mother-in-law aged like a different person within a month. Sometimes she stares off into the distance by herself and smiles wanly. Her spirit seems to have been damaged. One Sunday, the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw two heavy-looking middle-aged men in suits. Behind them were a couple of policemen wearing gloves. I opened the door to see if they were there. One of the suits pulled out a pocketbook from his chest and showed it to me. We are from the police. I had seen this scene many times on TV. It was detectives. The other suit spoke. I'm sorry about what happened. Huh. We're here today to search your house. We would like to take a look at your house now. We would have done it sooner, but it took a while to get the warrant. At that moment, a group of uniformed police officers entered the house. My father-in-law and husband were out playing golf. My mother-in-law was sitting in the back room watching TV. After a while, a voice came from the kitchen. "Isn't this it?" The kitchen was noisy. I went to the kitchen. And I rolled my eyes. In the plastic bag in the officer's hand was a 50-centimeter long battery refill. Where was it? I turned up the bottom board here. The policeman pointed to an underfloor storage space near the kitchen door. That's where my mother-in-law keeps her pickles. Usually the bottom plate was not visible because it was full of jars. The bottom plate was removed, and I could see wet soil at the bottom of the bottom plate. That must be what sulfuric acid is. When my mother-in-law heard these words, she emerged from the back of the house and suddenly uttered a strange noise, then fainted. "I would like you to come to the station." My mother-in-law frankly admitted that she had committed the crime. The same thing happened to Ruby's husband. She had obtained the battery refill at a nearby home improvement center. Later, a psychiatric evaluation revealed that she had a mental disorder, and she was admitted to a mental hospital. 2 years later, it was decided that my mother-in-law would be discharged from the hospital. My mother-in-law became a different kind of person from before. It seems that she had a mental disorder since the time of the incident with Ruby's husband. She is still on probation and there are still rumors in the neighborhood, but she is very sorry for what she did and always repeats, "Amy, I'm sorry about that time." 3 years have passed since then. I am now 32 years old. Our family still lives in the same house. About 3 months ago, my wife and I were finally blessed with a child. Today we went to the hospital and the test results showed that it was a girl. The junior high school where I worked for many years will be closed next year and I was about to be transferred to a junior high school in a neighboring town. I think I will take this opportunity to become a full-time housewife and do my best to raise my children.